In the vast darkness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a universal truth that few species ever truly comprehend: never underestimate the quiet ones. The Galactic Council learned this lesson through whispered warnings and diplomatic cables. The Zephyrian Consortium discovered it through economic collapse and territorial losses. But the mighty Nigma Empire? They learned it through complete and utter annihilation. This is not a story about heroes in shining armor or noble sacrifices for the greater good. This is the account of what happens when a species that spent millennia learning to survive on a death world finally stops asking nicely. When humanity's diplomatic smiles fade and their true nature emerges from behind centuries of carefully constructed civility. The Nigma made one fatal mistake: they believed that because humans talked softly, they had no stick at all. They confused restraint for weakness, diplomacy for cowardice, and patience for helplessness. They ignored every warning, dismissed every threat, and laughed at every consequence until the laughter died in their throats and their empire burned in nuclear fire. What you're about to read is the classified account of how the most feared military force in 3 galactic arms was reduced to scattered refugees and cautionary tales in less than 6 months. How a species that had conquered star systems before humans learned to make fire was systematically dismantled by the descendants of persistence hunters who refused to know when they were beaten. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders, but it has never seen anything quite like human warfare. And, by the time the Nigma realized this truth, it was already far too late. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching the swirling nebula of Sector 7 paint the darkness in shades of purple and gold. The irony of the station's name wasn't lost on her as she prepared for what would likely be the most important diplomatic failure of her career. In 3 hours, she would deliver humanity's final warning to the Nigma Empire. In 3 hours and 5 minutes, they would probably laugh her out of the council chamber. The door behind her whispered open, and she didn't need to turn to know who had entered. Admiral Marcus Webb's presence filled a room like gravity well, bending conversations and attention toward him whether he wanted it or not. Today, she suspected he very much wanted it. The delegation from the Nigma flagship just docked, Webb said, his voice carrying the kind of controlled tension that preceded either brilliant victories or spectacular disasters. High War Master Thekron himself decided to grace us with his presence. Sarah finally turned, noting the way Webb's dress uniform seemed to strain against shoulders that had been built for combat, not ceremony. His hands, she noticed, never quite relaxed, always positioned as if ready to reach for weapons that weren't there. It was a habit shared by most humans who had served in the outer colonies, where diplomacy often came second to survival. "He's early," Sarah observed. "That's either very good or very bad. With the Nigma, it's usually bad." Webb moved to stand beside her at the viewing port. Their concept of punctuality is tied to dominance displays. Early arrival means they're confident they already know how this conversation will end. Below them, the Nigma flagship dominated the civilian traffic around Harmony Station like a predator among sheep. The vessel stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull scarred with the ritual markings that told the story of its conquests. Each symbol represented a world brought under Nigma rule, a species subjugated, a resistance crushed. Sarah had counted 47 distinct markings visible from this angle alone. "Have you read the preliminary reports from the Kepler incident?" Sarah asked. Webb's jaw tightened. "Every word. 3 times. The Kepler incident." Such a clinical name for what had happened to the human research station at Kepler 442b. 43 researchers and their families, including 16 children, had been studying the planet's unique crystalline formations when the Nigma Third Fleet arrived to claim the system. The researchers had transmitted their compliance with evacuation orders immediately, requesting only 72 hours to secure their equipment and research data. The Nigma had given them 20 minutes. When the researchers attempted to explain that they needed more time to safely shut down their antimatter containment systems, the Nigma commander had interpreted this as defiance. The orbital bombardment had begun before the human transport ships could even clear the atmosphere. By the time the rescue vessels arrived, there was nothing left but glass and radiation. The Council's response was predictable, Sarah continued. Stern diplomatic protests, economic sanctions that hurt everyone except the Nigma, and a strongly worded resolution that they used as kindling for their victory celebrations. Which brings us to today. Webb's reflection in the viewport looked older than his 45 years, worn down by too many compromises and too many unanswered crimes. Humanity's final attempt at civilized discourse. Sarah pulled out her tablet and reviewed her notes one last time. The document contained 3 pages of carefully crafted diplomatic language that boiled down to a simple message: stop killing humans or face the consequences. The words had been debated for weeks in committee, polished by lawyers, and approved by politicians who would never have to look a grieving parent in the eye. "Do you think they'll listen?" she asked. Webb was quiet for so long that Sarah began to think he hadn't heard the question. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much of how the galaxy really worked. The Nigma have been the dominant military power in this sector for over 8 centuries. They've conquered 47 star systems, enslaved dozens of species, and built an empire on the simple principle that might makes right. In all that time, no one has ever successfully challenged their authority. He paused, studying the flagship below. They see humans as weak because we prefer talking to fighting. They interpret our restraint as cowardice and our diplomacy as admission of inferiority. That doesn't answer my question. No, Ambassador. They won't listen. They can't listen. Their entire culture, their whole sense of identity, is built on the idea that they're the apex predators of this galaxy. To acknowledge that another species might pose a genuine threat would be to undermine everything they believe about themselves. Sarah felt a familiar weight settle in her stomach. She had hoped, despite everything she knew about the Nigma, that reason might prevail. That the death of 43 innocents might mean something to beings who claim to value strength and honor. "So this is really just theater," she said. "No." Webb's tone carried something that made Sarah look at him more closely. "This is documentation. When the history books are written, when the survivors of what's coming try to understand how it all started, they'll need to know that we tried. That we gave them every opportunity to choose a different path." The implications of his words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "Admiral, what exactly is the military preparing for?" "What we always prepare for, Ambassador. Everything." Before Sarah could respond, her assistant's voice crackled through the comm system. "Ambassador Chen, the Nigma delegation is requesting immediate conference. They say they don't have time for human delays." Webb smiled, but there was no humor in it. "See what I mean about dominance displays?" Sarah straightened her jacket and checked her reflection in the viewport one last time. 43 people had died because she and her colleagues had failed to make the Nigma understand that human lives had value. Today, she would try one more time to prevent that number from growing. "Wish me luck, Admiral." "I don't believe in luck, Ambassador. I believe in preparation, superior firepower, and the willingness to use both." He turned toward the door. "But, for what it's worth, I hope you prove me wrong about them." The council chamber on Harmony Station had been designed to intimidate. High ceilings, imposing architecture, and seating arrangements that seemed to dwarf individual occupants in favor of the collective whole. For most species, it worked as intended. The Nigma, however, seemed to view it as a challenge to overcome rather than a space to respect. High War Master Thekron stood nearly 3 meters tall, his exoskeleton polished to a mirror shine that reflected the chamber's lights like a constellation of tiny stars. 4 arms moved with predatory grace, each gesture calculated to demonstrate both physical power and casual disdain for anything the humans might consider important. His retinue of lesser officers flanked him like a honor guard, their own armor telling stories of conquest and dominance. Sarah had met Nigma before, but never one of such high rank. The experience was like standing next to a living weapon that had learned to speak. "Ambassador Chen," Thekron's voice resonated through multiple vocal chambers, creating harmonics that humans found distinctly unsettling. "We have come as requested, though we fail to understand why human grief requires our attention." The directness was intentional, designed to provoke an emotional response that could be interpreted as weakness. Sarah had been briefed on this tactic and prepared her counter accordingly. "High War Master, Thank you for accepting our invitation. The United Earth Alliance wishes to discuss the incident at Kepler 442b and establish protocols to prevent future misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? Thakron's mandibles clicked in what Sarah recognized as amusement. There was no misunderstanding. Humans were ordered to leave Nigma territory. They delayed. They faced consequences. This is how the galaxy works. 43 civilians, including children, died in that bombardment. They were complying with your evacuation order but needed time to safely shut down hazardous systems. They needed to obey immediately. Thakron moved closer, his height advantage making Sarah crane her neck to maintain eye contact. The strong survive by acting decisively. The weak die because they hesitate. Sarah felt her diplomatic training warring with basic human empathy. Every instinct screamed at her to respond with the anger that Thakron's casual dismissal of mass murder deserved. Instead, she reached for her tablet and activated the holographic display. "Hi War Master, I would like to show you something." The hologram that materialized showed a three-dimensional map of human space. Hundreds of systems glowed with soft blue light, connected by trade routes and communication networks that pulsed with activity. It was beautiful in its complexity, a testament to what could be achieved through cooperation and shared purpose. This represents the current extent of human territory, Sarah explained. 437 settled worlds, over 200 billion citizens, and the largest merchant fleet in the known galaxy. Thakron studied the display with the attention of a general surveying enemy positions. Impressive. For prey. Sarah highlighted specific systems in red. These 17 systems border territories that the Nigma Empire has claimed in the past 5 years. In each case, human merchants and civilians have withdrawn rather than contest your expansion. As they should. Now, Sarah manipulated the display, showing projected expansion patterns based on recent Nigma territorial claims. Based on current trends, our territories will overlap in 12 more systems within the next 2 years. Then, humans can withdraw from 12 more systems. Thakron's tone suggested this was the most obvious solution in the galaxy. Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment that would determine everything that followed. "Hi War Master, that is no longer an option humanity is prepared to consider." The chamber fell silent. Even the ambient hum of the station's systems seemed to fade as the weight of Sarah's words settled over the assembly. Thakron's 4 eyes fixed on her with the intensity of targeting systems acquiring a threat. "Explain." Sarah gestured, and the holographic display changed to show detailed statistics about human industrial capacity, population growth, and technological development. The numbers were staggering, even to her own species. Humanity has spent the past century focused on growth and exploration. We've built our civilization on the principle that the galaxy is vast enough for everyone to find their place without conflict. She paused, letting the implications sink in. The Kepler incident has forced us to reconsider that philosophy. "You speak of consequences," Thakron said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated through the chamber's floor. "Do you threaten the Nigma Empire? I offer a choice." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Humanity is prepared to establish formal borders between our territories and yours. We will respect your sovereignty within agreed-upon boundaries, and we expect the same courtesy in return." "And if we refuse?" Sarah felt the weight of 2 civilizations balanced on her next words. Everything that followed would spring from this moment, this choice between reason and catastrophe. "Then, humanity will defend its citizens and territory by any means necessary." The silence that followed was absolute. Thakron's retinue shifted positions with the subtle precision of a military unit preparing for action. The High War Master himself seemed to grow larger, his exoskeleton creaking as internal hydraulics adjusted his posture for maximum intimidation. "You know nothing of war, human." His voice carried the certainty of someone who had never been seriously challenged. "Your species builds beautiful cities and impressive fleets, but you have no concept of true warfare. The Nigma have conquered this sector through strength, discipline, and the willingness to do whatever victory requires. I understand your perspective, Sarah replied carefully. But, I would ask you to consider that there may be forms of strength that your empire has never encountered. Thekron moved with startling speed, closing the distance between them until Sarah could see her reflection in his polished carapace. When he spoke, she could feel the vibrations through her bones. We have faced the war fleets of the hegemony and watched them burn. We have broken the crystal cities of the Vorthan and used their fragments to pave our victory roads. We have silenced the song weapons of the ethereal chorus and turned their harmonies into funeral dirges. Each word carried the weight of genuine historical achievement. What could your soft species possibly possess that we should fear? Sarah looked up at this embodiment of galactic conquest and spoke the words that would echo through history books yet to be written. Hope. Thekron's mandibles clicked again, but this time the sound carried confusion rather than amusement. Hope? Hope is what drives humans to build cities on worlds that try to kill them every day. Hope is what makes us reach for stars that our ancestors could barely see. Hope is what convinces us that tomorrow can be better than today, no matter how dark things seem. Sarah's voice carried the quiet conviction of someone stating fundamental truths about the universe. But, hope has a darker side, High War Master. When you threaten what we hope for, when you destroy what we've built in that hope's name, you transform hope into something far more dangerous. Which is determination. For the first time since entering the chamber, Thekron seemed uncertain. The concept Sarah was describing didn't fit into his understanding of how species responded to superior force. In his experience, weaker civilizations either submitted or were destroyed. There was no third option. You speak in riddles. Sarah gestured to the holographic display one final time. The image showed a single human ship, unremarkable among the thousands of vessels that comprised humanity's civilian fleet. But, as the display zoomed in, details emerged that told a different story. Hidden weapon ports, reinforced hull plating, and power systems far beyond anything a merchant vessel should require. High War Master, every human civilian ship built in the past 50 years incorporates design elements that could be rapidly converted for military use. Every human colony has industrial capacity that could be retooled for weapons production within months. Every human citizen has received basic military training as part of their education. She paused, letting him process the implications. We didn't plan for war, but we prepared for it anyway. Because you are cowards who fear the strong. No, Sarah said quietly. Because we learned from the extinct. The weight of that statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Thekron's certainty wavered as he considered species he had known, civilizations that had once seemed as permanent as stars but were now nothing more than archaeological curiosities and cautionary tales. The choice remains before you, Sarah continued. Formal borders, mutual respect, and peace between our peoples. Or the alternative that neither of us should want to explore. Thekron straightened to his full height, and, when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 8 centuries of unquestioned dominance. The Nigma Empire recognizes no equals and accepts no limitations. We will expand where we choose, when we choose, and any who stand in our way will be removed. This has been our way since before your species learned to make fire, and it will remain our way long after your cities are dust. Sarah felt something inside her chest collapse, a small flame of hope that had somehow survived despite everything she knew about the Nigma. She had come here knowing this would likely be the outcome, but some part of her had believed that reason might prevail. I am sorry to hear that, High War Master. Sorry? Thekron's laugh was a sound like grinding metal. You should be terrified, not sorry. When the Nigma warfleets darken your skies and your cities burn beneath our weapons, remember that you chose this path. Sarah gathered her materials and stood, her diplomatic mission complete in all the ways that mattered. High War Master, I need to correct a misunderstanding. I'm not sorry for humanity. We'll survive what's coming, just like we've survived everything else this galaxy has thrown at us. She met his gaze one final time. I'm sorry for you. Because you could have chosen differently. As Sarah walked toward the chamber exit, Thekron's voice followed her like a promise of doom. We have destroyed civilizations that were older and stronger than yours, human.
What makes you think the outcome will be any different?
Sarah paused at the doorway and spoke without turning around.
Because they weren't us.
The emergency session of the United Earth Council convened 18 hours after Ambassador Chen's return from Harmony Station. The Great Chamber beneath New Geneva's mountains had been designed to withstand direct nuclear bombardment, a precaution that seemed almost prophetic as humanity's leadership gathered to decide the fate of their species. Fleet Admiral Victoria Stone stood before the assembled representatives, her silver hair catching the harsh lights as she gestured toward the massive holographic display that dominated the chamber. The display showed the current disposition of human military assets across 400 worlds, a network of defensive installations and patrol fleets that had seemed adequate for keeping pirates and raiders at bay.
Against the Nigma Empire, it looked pathetically inadequate.
The situation is simple, Admiral Stone began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 40 years turning theoretical strategies into practical victories.
High War Master Thekron's response to our diplomatic overture was unambiguous. The Nigma Empire will not negotiate, will not compromise, and will not acknowledge humanity's right to exist as an independent civilization. Representative Martinez from the Luna colonies leaned forward in his seat.
Surely there must be some room for further negotiation. The Galactic Council, Stone interrupted, has already demonstrated its unwillingness to confront Nigma expansion.
They'll issue strongly worded condemnations while another dozen worlds burn. She manipulated the display, highlighting recent Nigma conquests. In the past 2 years, the Nigma have absorbed 7 independent systems without meaningful resistance from anyone.
President Harrison, her face drawn with the weight of imminent decision, spoke from her position at the council's head table.
Admiral, give us your honest assessment. Can we win a conventional war against the Nigma Empire?
The question hung in the air like a death sentence waiting to be pronounced. Stone had spent sleepless weeks running simulations, consulting with her best strategic minds, and analyzing every scrap of intelligence they had about Nigma military capabilities.
The answer was as clear as it was terrifying.
No, Madam President.
Not a conventional war.
Murmurs of dismay rippled through the chamber. Several representatives began speaking at once, their voices blending into a cacophony of fear and denial.
Stone waited for silence to return before continuing.
The Nigma possess superior firepower, better defensive technology, and 8 centuries of military experience. Their ships are larger, their weapons more powerful, and their strategic doctrine has been refined through countless successful campaigns. She paused, studying the faces of the people who would have to live with the consequences of whatever decision emerged from this chamber.
In a straight fight, fleet against fleet, they would destroy us.
Then we surrender, Representative Okafor said, his voice barely above a whisper. We negotiate terms, accept protectorate status, preserve what we can of human civilization.
With respect, Representative, Stone replied, you're thinking like a rational being dealing with other rational beings. The Nigma don't take surrenders from species they consider fundamentally inferior.
They take subjects or they take corpses.
The holographic display shifted to show footage from recent Nigma conquests.
Worlds reduced to glass, populations relocated to work camps, entire civilizations transformed into footnotes in the Empire's expanding chronicles. The images spoke louder than any words about what surrender would actually mean.
There is another option, Stone said quietly. President Harrison's eyes fixed on the Admiral with the intensity of someone grasping for hope in darkness. Explain. Project Sleeping Giant.
The chamber fell silent. Even the representatives who had been briefed on humanity's most classified defense initiatives had heard only rumors about Sleeping Giant. The project existed in compartmentalized cells, its true scope known only to a handful of individuals who had been prepared for this exact moment. 70 years ago, Stone continued, human military planners began preparing for the possibility of existential war against a superior enemy. They asked a simple question: what would it take to defend humanity against an opponent we couldn't hope to match in conventional terms? The display changed again, showing what appeared to be ordinary civilian infrastructure. Cargo haulers, mining facilities, research stations, and manufacturing centers spread across human space. To casual observation, it looked like the peaceful development of an expanding civilization.
Every human world built in the past 7 decades incorporates dual-use infrastructure.
Manufacturing plants that can be converted to weapons production in a matter of days.
Civilian shipyards equipped with the tooling necessary to build warships.
Research facilities conducting theoretical studies that happen to have immediate military applications. Stone's voice carried a note of pride mixed with grim necessity. We built a war machine and disguised it as a civilization. Representative Chen raised her hand.
Are you telling us that our entire colonial expansion program has been a military project? I'm telling you that human expansion has always assumed we would eventually face an enemy that outmatched us individually. So we made sure we wouldn't have to face them individually.
Stone gestured, and the display showed cargo ships traveling between human worlds. Every civilian vessel in our fleet can be fitted with military-grade sensors and weapons in less than 48 hours. Every merchant captain holds a reserve military commission. Every trade route has been surveyed for tactical advantages. President Harrison leaned back in her chair, processing the implications.
How many people know about this? In its entirety? Perhaps 50 individuals across all human space. In part? Every human citizen has been touched by it. Stone's expression was grave. We didn't want to create a militaristic society. We wanted to create a society that could become militaristic if it had no other choice. And, you believe this gives us a chance against the Nigma?
I believe it gives us the only chance we're going to get. The debate that followed lasted 14 hours. Representatives argued about the moral implications of a hidden military buildup, the economic costs of total war mobilization, and the precedent it would set for human society going forward. But, beneath the political posturing, everyone in that chamber understood the fundamental reality: they were choosing between transformation and extinction. When the final vote was tallied, the decision was unanimous. Operation Sleeping Giant would commence immediately. Across human space, the transformation began with a subtlety that would have impressed even the Nigma. There were no dramatic announcements, no visible military buildups that might trigger premature enemy action. Instead, routine maintenance schedules accelerated. Civilian contractors received new work orders. Research projects shifted focus with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that made revolutionary changes look like simple administrative updates. Dr. Elizabeth Warren had spent the past 15 years studying exotic matter interactions at the Titan Research Institute. Her theoretical work on spacetime manipulation had earned her 3 Nobel Prizes and the quiet respect of colleagues who understood perhaps 10% of her calculations. What they didn't understand was that her research had immediate and devastating military applications. The delivery system is ready, she reported to Admiral Stone via encrypted quantum communication. We can deploy the first-generation devices within 6 days. Stone nodded from her command post on Luna. Around her, the most advanced tactical planning computers in human space processed scenarios that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. How many targets can you service in the first wave? 43 primary targets, with secondary deployment capabilities for an additional 120 sites. Elizabeth's voice carried the peculiar mix of scientific fascination and moral horror that came with weaponizing fundamental forces. Admiral, what we're discussing here will rewrite the basic laws of warfare. Doctor, the Nigma rewrote the rules when they murdered 43 civilians for the crime of existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. We're simply responding in kind. In the asteroid mining facilities beyond Mars, Chief Engineer Roberto Silva supervised the conversion of industrial equipment that had been boring through solid rock for decades. The same systems that could pulverize asteroids could be reconfigured to manufacture weapon components with precision measured in individual atoms. His crews worked around the clock, transforming peaceful infrastructure into instruments of war with the efficiency that came from detailed planning and long preparation. The fabrication lines are operational, he reported to his military liaison. We can begin weapons production immediately. Colonel Hayes, a woman who had spent her career preparing for wars that never came, studied the production schedules with satisfaction. How long until we reach full capacity? If we maintain current projections, we'll be producing more advanced weaponry than the rest of the galaxy combined within 30 days. Aboard the merchant vessel Prosperity, Captain Sarah Kim received new orders that required her to open sealed compartments that had been welded shut since her ship's construction. Inside, she found military-grade sensor arrays, weapon systems that would make her cargo hauler more powerful than most nations' entire fleets, and tactical computers loaded with strategies that assumed the worst-case scenario had already arrived.
"This is insane," her chief engineer muttered as they installed weapon systems designed to turn civilian ships into commerce raiders.
"We're a cargo hauler, not a battleship."
"We're whatever humanity needs us to be," Sarah replied, watching displays that now showed her ship's true capabilities.
"And, right now, humanity needs us to be something the Nigma have never encountered before."
On the frontier world of New Aberdeen, Governor Patricia Walsh opened orders that transformed her agricultural colony into a fortress.
The terraforming equipment that had made their world habitable could be repurposed to create defensive installations.
The atmospheric processors could be converted into chemical weapons factories.
The peaceful farming communities could become guerrilla strongholds that would make occupation impossible. "How long do we have?" her military advisor asked. Patricia looked up at the star-filled sky, knowing that somewhere among those lights, the Nigma war machine was already beginning to move.
"Not long enough." But then, it never is. The Nigma response to humanity's diplomatic rejection was both swift and predictable.
High War Master Thekron dispatched the Third Fleet to secure the Kepler system permanently and establish it as a forward base for further expansion into human space. 47 ships of the line, each capable of reducing a planet to rubble, departed from Nigma territory with the confidence that came from 8 centuries of unchallenged supremacy.
They expected to find terrified human civilians fleeing before superior force.
They expected token resistance from obsolete defensive platforms. They expected another easy conquest to add to their empire's growing collection of victory monuments. What they found instead was something that no Nigma strategist had ever planned for, an empty system that felt like a trap.
"Where are they?"
Sub-Commander Gektal asked, studying sensor readings that showed no human presence in the Kepler system.
Intelligence indicated significant human activity here.
Thekron studied the tactical displays with the attention of a predator trying to locate hidden prey. The system's planets showed signs of recent habitation, but no active signatures. Communication arrays remained functional but transmitted only silence.
Mining stations drifted in stable orbits with their crews mysteriously absent.
"They fled," he concluded.
As expected.
But something about the situation triggered instincts that had kept him alive through dozens of campaigns. The withdrawal was too complete, too organized. Most species left behind refugees, stragglers, or desperate last stands when faced with overwhelming force.
The humans had simply vanished like smoke.
"Sir," his sensor operator reported, "I'm detecting anomalous readings from the 4th planet's surface."
"Specify." "Unknown energy signatures. The pattern doesn't match any known technology in our databases." Thekron felt the first stirring of unease.
In his experience, unknown technologies in contested systems usually meant unpleasant surprises for the conquering force.
"Launch reconnaissance probes."
The probes descended toward the planet's surface, transmitting routine scans of geological formations, atmospheric composition, and infrastructure assessment. Everything appeared normal until they reached the coordinates where the human research station had been located. The station was gone. Not destroyed, not abandoned, but simply absent. In its place stood a structure that defied immediate categorization. Crystalline formations arranged in patterns that suggested both natural formation and artificial design stretched across several square kilometers. They pulsed with internal light that seemed to respond to the probe's approach.
"Analysis?" Thekron demanded.
His science officer manipulated sensor data with 4 hands moving in perfect coordination. The formations appear to be composed of exotic matter arranged in quantum-locked configurations. The energy output is minimal but consistent with large-scale spacetime manipulation. In terms I can use for tactical planning.
"I don't know, sir. This technology is completely outside our experience."
Before Thekron could respond, his communications officer interrupted with a priority alert. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission on all frequencies."
Human origin.
The main screen activated, showing a human figure that Thekron recognized from intelligence briefings. Admiral Victoria Stone appeared calm and professional, as if she were delivering a routine status report rather than addressing the fleet that had come to conquer her species.
Hi War Master Thekron, I am Fleet Admiral Stone of the United Earth Defense Force. You are currently in violation of human territorial sovereignty. You have one opportunity to withdraw your forces to positions outside our established borders. Thekron's mandibles clicked with amusement. Admiral Stone, you are in no position to make demands. Your system is defenseless and your species will submit to Nigma authority.
I'm afraid that's not going to happen, High War Master. You see, we've learned something important from studying your empire's expansion patterns.
You've never faced an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything to stop you. Empty threats from a defeated enemy. Not threats. Demonstration. Stone's expression remained eerily calm.
The structures your probes are currently scanning are reality anchors. They manipulate local spacetime to create regions where faster-than-light travel becomes impossible. Thekron felt ice form in his primary heart.
You lie. Your own sensors will confirm it. Any ship attempting to engage FTL drives within this system will find themselves trapped in normal space.
The quantum field effect extends for approximately 12 light hours in all directions. As if summoned by her words, Thekron's navigation officer reported exactly what Stone had predicted.
Sir, FTL drives are non-responsive.
We're reading massive gravitational anomalies throughout the system.
This is impossible, Thekron snarled.
No species possesses technology capable of manipulating spacetime on this scale.
You're right, Stone agreed.
No species has possessed this technology.
Until now.
Her image leaned forward slightly. High War Master, you have exactly 1 hour to begin withdrawal from human space.
If your forces remain past that deadline, we will demonstrate additional capabilities that you will find even less pleasant.
The transmission ended, leaving Thekron staring at a blank screen while his tactical staff processed the implications of humanity's revelation.
If the humans could indeed prevent FTL travel, his fleet was trapped 12 hours from the nearest friendly territory with no way to call for reinforcements. Options, he demanded.
His tactical officer was reviewing engagement protocols with the speed of someone trying to find solutions that didn't exist. Sir, we can destroy the planetary installations from orbit.
Standard bombardment should neutralize whatever technology they're using. Do it.
The Third Fleet's primary batteries opened fire in a display of destructive power that had reduced dozens of worlds to compliance. Plasma streams capable of boiling oceans struck the crystalline formations with pinpoint accuracy, delivering enough energy to vaporize entire mountain ranges. The formations absorbed the bombardment without visible damage.
Impossible, Thekron breathed.
Sir, his science officer reported, the structures appear to be converting incoming energy into additional field strength.
Our bombardment is actually reinforcing their effect. For the first time in 8 centuries of conquest, a Nigma fleet faced an enemy that their superior firepower couldn't overcome. The realization sent ripples of uncertainty through crews that had never known defeat.
Fall back to the system's edge, Thekron ordered.
We'll find another approach.
But, as the Third Fleet maneuvered toward what they hoped was safety, Admiral Stone's words proved prophetic. Additional human capabilities were indeed about to be demonstrated, and the Nigma would find them considerably less pleasant than mere spatial imprisonment. The merchant vessel Prosperity dropped out of stealth mode directly behind the Nigma formation, her cargo holds opening to reveal weapons that no Nigma strategist had ever imagined. Captain Kim's converted hauler possessed firepower that outmatched most Nigma battleships, and her crew had trained for this moment their entire lives.
But she wasn't alone.
Across the system, dozens of supposedly civilian ships revealed their true nature as humanity's hidden fleet materialized from the void like ghosts becoming solid. Each vessel carried armaments designed not just to destroy Nigma ships, but to do so in ways that would send a message to any survivors.
Admiral Stone to all vessels, the communication reached every human ship simultaneously. You are cleared to engage. Show them what happens when you back a human into a corner. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for generations, though the Nigma Empire wouldn't survive long enough to learn from it. Humanity's hidden fleet moved with coordination that spoke of decades of preparation and an intimate understanding of their enemy's tactics.
They struck from unexpected angles, used weapons that violated the Nigma's understanding of physical law, and demonstrated a ruthlessness that shocked an empire built on the principle of might making right. When it was over, only one Nigma ship escaped the Kepler system, its hull scarred and its crew traumatized by their first encounter with human warfare. High War Master Thekron was not among the survivors. The message the escaped ship carried back to Nigma territory was simple and terrifying: the humans were nothing like what their intelligence had suggested. They had hidden their true nature behind centuries of peaceful expansion and diplomatic restraint. Now that the mask had fallen away, something far more dangerous had been revealed. War had come to the galaxy, and, for the first time in 8 centuries, the Nigma Empire was not guaranteed to emerge victorious. The emergency session of the Nigma High Command convened in the crystalline chambers beneath Thekros Prime, the Empire's capital world. For 800 years, these halls had echoed with the sounds of victory celebrations and expansion planning. Today, they rang with something that no Nigma had ever expected to hear: the bitter taste of defeat. Emperor Vashtal dominated the chamber from his throne of conquered metals, each piece taken from a civilization that had once dared to resist Nigma expansion. His forearms gestured with barely controlled rage as he reviewed the intelligence reports from the Kepler disaster. Of the 47 ships that had comprised the Third Fleet, only one had returned. The Blade of Conquest limped home with her hull breached in 17 places and her crew traumatized by experiences that challenged everything they believed about warfare. "Explain to me," Vashtal's voice reverberated through harmonic frequencies that made lesser Nigma instinctively submit, "how the most powerful fleet in our empire was destroyed by a species we dismissed as weak." War leader Morthek, the highest-ranking survivor of the Third Fleet, stood before his emperor with the posture of someone who had looked into the abyss and found it looking back. His once pristine armor bore scorch marks from weapons that his people had no names for, and his primary left arm had been replaced with a cybernetic prosthetic after something had dissolved the original limb at the molecular level. "Your Imperial Majesty, the humans possess technology that our intelligence services failed to detect. They have developed space-time manipulation capabilities that can trap entire fleets in normal space, weapons that convert matter directly into energy, and tactical coordination that suggests hive mind-level integration." "Impossible," declared Science Primary Gelros, the Empire's leading expert on inferior species technology. "Our analysis of human development indicates they lack the theoretical framework necessary for such advances. They are primarily focused on agricultural development and peaceful expansion." Morthek's mandibles clicked with bitter amusement. "Science Primary, with respect, our analysis was catastrophically wrong. The humans have been preparing for this war for decades. Every aspect of their civilization that we interpreted as weakness was actually strategic camouflage." The Emperor leaned forward, his attention focused with the intensity that had made him the most feared ruler in 3 galactic arms. "Elaborate." "Their merchant fleet consists entirely of converted warships. Every cargo vessel in human space can be armed with military-grade weapons in less than 48 hours. Their civilian infrastructure is dual-purpose, capable of producing advanced military equipment at a rate that exceeds our entire manufacturing capacity." Morthek paused, reliving memories that would haunt his dreams forever. "Your Majesty, they turned their entire civilization into a trap, and we walked directly into it." Vashtal studied the tactical displays that showed the current disposition of Nigma forces. The Third Fleet's destruction had created a gap in their defensive perimeter that could be exploited by any enemy with sufficient intelligence and audacity. Unfortunately, the humans appeared to possess both in abundance. "What are our losses in strategic terms?" Admiral Fakras, commanding officer of the Second Fleet, manipulated the holographic display to show the broader tactical situation. "The destruction of the Third Fleet has exposed our entire eastern frontier. The humans now possess detailed intelligence on our ship designs, weapons capabilities, and tactical doctrines. They've captured intact examples of our technology and demonstrated the ability to counter our most advanced systems." "And our advantages?"
superior numbers, established infrastructure, and 8 centuries of military tradition. Thakras hesitated before continuing. However, these advantages assume conventional warfare against a conventional enemy. The humans appear to have abandoned conventional limitations. Emperor Vashtal rose from his throne, his 3-meter height making even his largest generals seem diminutive by comparison. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had never been successfully challenged. Summon the 1st through 5th fleets. Mobilize the Imperial Guard. Activate all reserve forces. His 4 eyes glowed with the internal bioluminescence that indicated extreme emotional states. If the humans wish to face the full might of the Nigma Empire, we will accommodate them. Your Majesty, War Leader Morthek interrupted, perhaps we should consider a strategic withdrawal to consolidate our forces and develop countermeasures to their new weapons. The chamber fell silent. In the entire history of the Nigma Empire, no military officer had ever suggested retreat as a viable strategy. The concept was so foreign to their culture that most of the assembled commanders needed several seconds to process what they had just heard. War Leader Morthek, the Emperor's voice dropped to harmonic frequencies that made the chamber's crystalline walls resonate ominously. Are you suggesting that the Nigma Empire should flee from inferior beings? I'm suggesting that we face an enemy unlike any we have ever encountered. The humans don't fight to conquer territory or claim resources. They fight to eliminate threats to their existence. Morthek's voice carried the conviction of someone who had witnessed humanity's true nature firsthand. Your Majesty, they will sacrifice entire fleets to destroy a single Nigma vessel. They will turn their own worlds into weapons rather than allow us to capture them intact. This is not conquest they're planning. This is extinction. The Emperor's response was swift and final. Guards seized Morthek and dragged him from the chamber while his protests echoed off the crystalline walls. His fate was sealed the moment he had suggested that the Empire's enemies might be anything other than prey waiting to be harvested. Does anyone else wish to voice concerns about human capabilities? Vashtal asked, studying the assembled officers with predatory intensity. The silence was absolute. Excellent. Admiral Thakras, you will command the combined fleet operation. Your mission is simple: destroy every human world, capture every human ship, and reduce their species to a cautionary tale that other inferior beings can contemplate during their own subjugation. 3 days after the Kepler incident, the largest fleet in Nigma history departed from their core territories. 237 ships of the line, supported by carrier groups, supply vessels, and specialist craft that had been developed specifically for planetary bombardment operations. The Armada represented the accumulated military might of 8 centuries of conquest, a force that had never been assembled in its entirety because no enemy had ever required such overwhelming response. Emperor Vashtal watched the fleet's departure from his palace observation deck, his satisfaction tempered by the nagging certainty that something about this situation wasn't developing according to established patterns. In his experience, inferior species either submitted immediately when faced with superior force, or fought desperate defensive actions that delayed their inevitable defeat. The humans had done neither. They had attacked first. Admiral Stone stood in the command center of the converted asteroid base Cerberus station, watching displays that tracked Nigma fleet movements across 3 sectors. The base itself was a masterpiece of hidden engineering, built into an asteroid field that appeared uninhabited to casual observation but actually contained the most advanced military coordination facility in human space. The Nigma response is exactly what our psychological profiles predicted, reported Colonel Anderson, the station's intelligence chief. Overwhelming force applied with maximum prejudice. They're committing over 60% of their total fleet strength to a single operation. Stone nodded, studying tactical projections that showed the incoming Nigma armada. The numbers were sobering even by optimistic estimates. The enemy possessed firepower sufficient to sterilize entire star systems. In a conventional engagement, humanity's forces would be obliterated within hours. Fortunately, humanity had abandoned conventional limitations. Status report on Phase 2 operations? Ghost Squadron has penetrated Nigma territory and is currently establishing forward positions. The stealth technology is performing beyond specifications. They're operating within 50 light-years of the enemy capital without detection.
Stone manipulated the display to show a three-dimensional map of Nigma space. Red icons marked confirmed military installations, industrial facilities, and population centers that had been identified through decades of careful intelligence gathering. Each target had been selected not just for its strategic value, but for its psychological impact on an empire that had never experienced warfare within its own borders.
Commence Phase 2. Authorization Stone 77 Alpha.
Across human space, the war machine that had been hidden in plain sight for decades finally revealed its true purpose. Manufacturing centers that had produced agricultural equipment began churning out weapons designed specifically to counter Nigma technology. Research facilities completed projects that had been decades in development, producing innovations that would rewrite the fundamental rules of warfare. Hidden shipyards activated construction programs that would triple humanity's military fleet within months. But the most significant change was in the human population itself. Citizens who had lived peaceful lives as farmers, merchants, and researchers received activation orders that transformed them into something their enemies had never encountered, an entire species committed to total warfare. Captain Elena Vasquez had spent 15 years operating a small cargo service between the Outer Rim colonies. Her ship, the Dancing Bear, was unremarkable in every way that mattered to customs officials and potential pirates. What they couldn't detect were the military-grade sensor arrays hidden behind false bulkheads, the quantum communication system that connected her directly to Terran Defense Command, or the fact that her cargo holds contained enough antimatter to level a city. Orders received, she reported to her handler.
Target confirmed as Nigma Forward Supply Depot at Kyria 7. Estimated garrison strength is minimal.
The Kyria system sat at the intersection of three major Nigma trade routes, making it a critical logistics hub for the Empire's eastern territories. The supply depot orbiting the system's seventh planet contained enough material to supply an entire fleet for months, and its destruction would force the Nigma to extend their supply lines by hundreds of light-years.
Elena's approach was masterfully executed.
The Dancing Bear entered the system as part of a legitimate cargo convoy, her transponder identifying her as an independent merchant seeking trading opportunities with the Nigma garrison. The depot's automated defense systems recognized her as a non-threat and allowed her to dock at the civilian moorings. What followed demonstrated humanity's newfound approach to warfare with devastating clarity.
Elena's cargo holds didn't contain trade goods.
They contained gravity bombs calibrated to collapse the depot's structural integrity from within, and her crew consisted of former Special Forces operators who had been preparing for this mission their entire careers.
The Nigma garrison never knew what hit them.
The depot's destruction was so complete that investigating vessels found nothing but expanding clouds of debris and radiation. More importantly, the depot's destruction occurred during a shift change, ensuring that news of the attack would reach the maximum number of Nigma military personnel.
Similar operations commenced simultaneously across Nigma territory. Supply convoys vanished between systems.
Forward bases suffered catastrophic system failures that couldn't be explained by conventional sabotage. Communications networks experienced cascading disruptions that isolated entire sectors from central command. The Nigma Empire, which had spent 8 centuries as the hunter, suddenly found itself prey to an enemy that struck from shadows and vanished before retaliation was possible. High Admiral Fakras received the first reports of the attacks while his massive fleet was still 3 days from human space. The initial assessments were confused and contradictory, with different sources reporting everything from equipment malfunctions to coordinated terrorist operations.
"This is impossible," he declared, studying intelligence reports that painted a picture of systematic assault across the Empire's entire territory. "How can a species with no interstellar intelligence capability be conducting coordinated operations behind our lines?"
His intelligence chief, a scarred veteran of dozens of successful campaigns, manipulated the tactical display to show the scope of the human infiltration. "Sir, the attacks suggest that human operatives have been positioned throughout our territory for years, possibly decades.
They're activating sleeper assets that have been planning these operations since before the current conflict began." The implications were staggering.
For the humans to have anticipated this war and prepared accordingly suggested a level of strategic thinking that challenged everything the Nigma believed about inferior species.
Their enemies hadn't simply built better weapons, they had fundamentally reimagined what warfare could look like. Casualties? Thakras demanded.
17 installations destroyed, 43 supply convoys lost, and approximately 4,000 military personnel killed or missing. The intelligence chief paused before delivering the most disturbing news. Sir, in no case have we detected the enemy forces responsible. They strike without warning and withdraw without trace. Thakras felt something he had never experienced in 4 decades of military service: uncertainty about the outcome of a battle before it began. The Nigma way of war was built on overwhelming force applied with brutal efficiency. Facing an enemy that refused to present targets for that force was like trying to punch smoke. Accelerate our advance. The humans want to play games in our territory? We'll remove their ability to coordinate by destroying their command structure. But, even as he gave the order, Thakras understood that he was no longer hunting prey. The humans had turned the galaxy into their hunting ground, and the Nigma fleet was becoming the target. In the depths of space between stars, Ghost Squadron continued its infiltration of Nigma territory. 12 ships built with technology that bent electromagnetic radiation around their hulls, making them effectively invisible to conventional sensors. Each vessel carried a crew of specialists who had trained their entire lives for operations behind enemy lines. Commander Sarah Kim, the former merchant captain who had become humanity's most effective covert operative, studied the tactical display that showed her squadron's targets. The Nigma home system contained industrial facilities that had supplied the Empire's war machine for centuries. Their destruction would cripple the enemy's ability to replace losses and maintain their fleet. All ships, this is Ghost Leader. Phase 3 is authorized. Target the industrial complexes and withdraw immediately after completion. Do not engage enemy patrols unless absolutely necessary. The attack on Thekros Prime began at 0347 local time, when the planet's industrial night shift was at its peak efficiency. Gravity bombs materialized inside manufacturing facilities that had been operating continuously for 400 years. Fusion plants suffered containment failures that turned them into miniature stars for exactly 37 seconds. Orbital shipyards experienced structural collapses that sent billions of tons of construction material cascading into the planet's atmosphere. The damage was catastrophic, but the psychological impact was even more devastating. For the first time in 8 centuries, the Nigma homeworld was under attack. Their capital, the symbol of their invincibility, burned with fires that could be seen from space. Emperor Vashtal watched his world burn from his palace balcony, his forearms trembling with rage that had nowhere to direct itself. The humans had struck at the heart of his empire and vanished before his forces could respond. They had turned his greatest strength, his overwhelming military superiority, into a liability by refusing to present targets that could be overwhelmed. Find them, he commanded his assembled military leaders. Find them and destroy them, or I will find new leaders who can. But finding an enemy that moved like smoke and struck like lightning was proving impossible for a military machine designed to crush conventional opponents. The Nigma Empire, which had built its entire identity on the principle of superior force, was discovering that some enemies couldn't be defeated by force alone. They required something that the Nigma had never needed to develop: imagination. Unfortunately for the Empire, imagination was something that humans possessed in abundance. And they were just getting started. The combined Nigma armada arrived at the edge of human space to find something that challenged every assumption their strategists had made about defensive warfare: nothing. No massive battle stations, no fleet formations positioned to contest their advance, no desperate last stands that would at least provide the satisfaction of watching enemies die beneath superior firepower. Instead, they found empty space that felt like an elaborate trap. Admiral Thakras stood on the command bridge of the Emperor's Wrath, studying sensor readings that showed human space as apparently defenseless. Colonies registered normal populations, industrial centers operated at standard capacity, and trade routes functioned with the mundane efficiency of a civilization going about its daily business. The only thing missing was any sign of military preparation for the largest invasion force in galactic history. Intelligence assessment, he demanded from his staff. Commander Velthak manipulated the tactical display with the precision of someone trained to find patterns in apparent chaos. Sir, human civilian traffic appears normal across all monitored systems. We're detecting standard commercial communications, routine cargo movements, and no indication of military mobilization.
That's impossible. They know we're coming.
Yes, sir.
Our intelligence networks confirm that human leadership is aware of our fleet's approach. However, their response doesn't match any known defensive doctrine.
Thakras felt the familiar stirring of unease that had plagued him since learning of the Third Fleet's destruction. In his experience, when enemies behaved in ways that defied military logic, it usually meant they possessed capabilities that weren't immediately apparent.
Begin the advance. First and second battle groups will secure the Outer Rim territories.
Third and fourth groups will advance on core human systems. Maintain maximum dispersion and prepare for unconventional resistance.
The Nigma fleet began its methodical advance into human territory, each battle group powerful enough to conquer entire civilizations.
Their ships moved in formations that had been perfected through 8 centuries of successful campaigns, their weapons powered up and their crews prepared for the kind of overwhelming victory that had made the Empire the dominant force in the galaxy. What they encountered instead was something that no Nigma commander had ever faced, an enemy that turned their greatest strengths into fatal vulnerabilities. The first indication that something was fundamentally wrong came when the second battle group's flagship, Eternal Dominance, suffered a catastrophic antimatter containment failure while transiting empty space between systems. The explosion was visible from 8 light-years away, and the ship's destruction was so complete that investigating vessels found nothing but elementary particles and radiation.
Sabotage? Admiral Thakras asked when the report reached his command ship. Unknown, sir.
The failure occurred during normal space transit with no enemy contacts within 1,000 light-years.
Our investigation teams found no evidence of external attack or internal sabotage.
Commander Velthak paused before delivering the most disturbing detail. Sir, the failure pattern suggests that someone with intimate knowledge of Nigma starship design introduced a resonance cascade into the containment system.
The implications were staggering.
For humans to possess detailed knowledge of Nigma antimatter technology suggested either espionage capabilities that had completely evaded Imperial security, or intelligence sources that were far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined.
Continue the advance. Route additional engineering teams to inspect all antimatter systems for potential vulnerabilities.
But the Eternal Dominance was just the beginning. Over the following 6 hours, the Nigma fleet experienced a cascade of failures that couldn't be explained by coincidence or equipment malfunction.
Navigation systems developed subtle errors that sent ships light-years off course.
Communication arrays suffered resonance failures that isolated vessels from their command structure. Weapons systems experienced targeting malfunctions that made accurate fire impossible. Each failure was minor by itself, barely noticeable unless someone was specifically looking for problems. Taken together, they represented the systematic degradation of the most powerful military force in galactic history. Sir, reported the fleet's chief engineer, we've identified the source of our technical difficulties. Someone has introduced quantum viruses into our computer systems. The viruses are designed to activate under specific conditions and cause failures that appear to be random equipment malfunctions.
Admiral Thakras felt ice form in his primary circulation system. How is that possible? Our computer systems are isolated from external networks.
The viruses were introduced during routine maintenance operations at our home bases. They've been dormant in our systems for weeks, possibly months, waiting for activation signals. The revelation that human operatives had penetrated Nigma security so thoroughly that they could sabotage the Empire's most critical military assets was beyond unsettling. It suggested a level of preparation and capability that challenged every assumption about human limitations.
Can the viruses be purged? Not without completely rebuilding our computer systems from scratch. The quantum encryption is unlike anything in our databases. Thakras studied the tactical situation with growing comprehension of how completely his enemy had outmaneuvered him. The humans hadn't built massive fleets to contest his invasion because they didn't need to.
They had turned his own fleet into a weapon against itself. All ships implement manual control protocols.
Disable all automated systems and revert to direct crew operation. The order effectively reduced the most advanced fleet in galactic history to the technological level of primitive space forces, but it was the only way to prevent further sabotage. What Thakras didn't realize was that the humans had anticipated this response and planned accordingly. Dr. Elizabeth Warren monitored the Nigma fleet's struggles from her command post in the outer system, watching as enemy ships began implementing manual control protocols with the kind of methodical precision that spoke of excellent training and poor strategic thinking. "They're reacting exactly as our behavioral models predicted," she reported to Admiral Stone. "Reverting to manual control will reduce their operational efficiency by approximately 60% and make them vulnerable to the next phase." "Initiate Prometheus Protocol," Stone replied. Authorization confirmed. What followed was humanity's most ambitious psychological warfare operation, designed not just to defeat the Nigma fleet but to break the Empire's will to continue fighting. The Prometheus Protocol activated devices that had been seeded throughout Nigma space over the previous decades, each one calibrated to create specific effects at precisely timed intervals. The first effect was the appearance of human ships where none should exist. Nigma sensors detected massive fleet formations materializing throughout their territory, each one powerful enough to threaten major installations. The formations moved with coordinated precision, struck without warning, and vanished before retaliation was possible. What the Nigma didn't understand was that most of the ships they were detecting didn't actually exist. The Prometheus Protocol used quantum field manipulation to create sensor signatures that were indistinguishable from real vessels, complete with weapon discharges and tactical maneuvers. The human fleet appeared to be everywhere at once, striking targets across thousands of light-years simultaneously. "This is impossible," Emperor Vashtal declared, studying reports that showed human forces conducting operations in 17 different sectors simultaneously. "No species possesses the fleet strength necessary for these operations." His military advisors struggled to provide explanations that made sense within conventional strategic thinking. "Your Majesty, the humans appear to have developed technology that allows instantaneous fleet deployment across galactic distances. They can strike any target within our territory without warning and withdraw before our forces can respond. Deploy our reserve fleets. Protect our core systems." But the reserve fleets found themselves chasing ghosts. Every time Nigma forces moved to intercept human raiders, they arrived to find empty space and no trace of enemy presence. Communications from damaged installations described massive human fleets that had appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating precision, and vanished like they had never existed. The psychological impact was exactly what humanity's strategists had intended. The Nigma Empire, which had built its entire identity on the concept of overwhelming force, found itself facing an enemy that seemed capable of being everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Their military machine, designed to crush conventional opponents, was helpless against foes that refused to fight conventionally. Meanwhile, Admiral Thakras struggled to maintain cohesion among his invasion fleet as it advanced deeper into human space. The quantum viruses continued to degrade his ship's systems, forcing crews to operate equipment manually while dealing with constant false sensor readings and communication disruptions. "Sir," his navigator reported, "we're receiving priority communications from the home fleet. They're reporting massive human raids across Imperial territory." "Impossible. All known human forces are located in this sector." "Sir, the reports indicate fleet strength formations conducting simultaneous operations in over 20 different systems." Thakras felt the first stirring of something that no Nigma commander had experienced in living memory: the possibility of defeat. If the humans could somehow project force across the entire galaxy while simultaneously defending their home territory, then the strategic situation was far worse than anyone had imagined. Maintain course. Whatever illusions the humans are creating in our territory, their core worlds remain vulnerable to direct assault. But, even as he gave the order, Thakras understood that he was no longer conducting a conquest. He was fighting for survival against an enemy that had transformed warfare itself into a weapon. The human colonies that the Nigma fleet finally reached were defended, but not in any way that their strategists had anticipated. Instead of massive orbital fortifications and defensive fleets, the humans had built something far more insidious: planets that were themselves weapons. New Harmony, the first world to face Nigma bombardment, demonstrated humanity's new approach to defensive warfare with devastating clarity. As Nigma ships moved into bombardment position, the planet's entire crust began to resonate with harmonic frequencies that interfered with enemy targeting systems.
Manufacturing centers that had produced civilian goods for decades revealed their true nature as they began launching missiles with yield calculations measured in stellar masses. But, the most disturbing development was the planetary population itself. Instead of fleeing or surrendering, the humans coordinated their response with hive-mind efficiency. Every civilian became part of a defensive network that could predict Nigma tactics and respond faster than any military computer. Children operated weapon systems with the precision of trained soldiers, while elderly citizens coordinated tactical networks that spanned continents. "They've turned their entire species into a military force," reported the Nigma officer who managed to escape New Harmony's destruction.
Every human civilian is trained for warfare. Every human facility is designed for defense. Their whole civilization is a weapon. The revelation that humanity had militarized not just their technology but their entire population was beyond anything the Nigma had ever encountered. They were fighting not just a species but an entire way of life that was fundamentally opposed to their own existence. Admiral Thakras watched his battle groups suffer casualties that would have broken lesser fleets while achieving objectives that proved meaningless upon closer inspection. Each human world they conquered turned out to be a trap designed to inflict maximum damage on occupying forces. Each victory came at a cost that made the next battle more difficult to win. "Casualties?" he asked his staff. 47 ships destroyed, 31 severely damaged, and approximately 60,000 personnel lost. Commander Velthak's voice carried the strain of someone trying to understand how superior forces could suffer such devastating losses. "Sir, the humans are using tactics that we have no counters for." "Such as?" "They sacrifice entire worlds to destroy single ships. They use their own populations as weapons. They fight battles that they know they cannot win in order to inflict casualties that we cannot afford." Velthak paused before delivering the most disturbing assessment. "Sir, they fight like a species that considers extinction preferable to defeat." Thakras studied the tactical display that showed his fleet's steady advance through human space. On the surface, the campaign appeared successful. Territory was being conquered, enemy forces were being destroyed, and human resistance was being systematically ground down. But the numbers told a different story. At the current rate of losses, his fleet would be combat ineffective long before it reached the core human systems. The enemy was spending their civilization like currency to purchase Nigma casualties, and the exchange rate was far more favorable to humanity than anyone had anticipated. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." The main screen activated to show Admiral Stone, her image transmitted from the bridge of a ship that sensors couldn't locate. She appeared calm and professional, as if discussing routine naval maneuvers rather than the largest military engagement in galactic history. "Admiral Thakras, I am offering you one final opportunity to withdraw your forces from human space. Your resistance is admirable, Admiral Stone, but ultimately futile. We have conquered 47 systems and destroyed dozens of your defensive installations. And lost 63 ships in the process." Stone's expression remained neutral. "Admiral, at your current rate of losses, your fleet will be destroyed long before it reaches Earth. You're fighting a war of attrition against an enemy that considers survival more important than victory. We have numerical superiority and superior firepower. You have traditional advantages against a non-traditional enemy. We've spent decades studying your empire's tactics and developing counters for every strategy in your military doctrine." Stone leaned forward slightly. "Admiral, you're trying to fight yesterday's war against tomorrow's enemy. What do you propose?" "Immediate withdrawal from human space, formal recognition of our territorial sovereignty, and war crimes trials for those responsible for the Kepler massacre." Thakras felt his mandibles click with what he hoped was amusement but suspected was something closer to hysteria. "And if we refuse? Then, you'll discover what happens when humans stop holding back." The transmission ended, leaving Thakras staring at a blank screen while processing the implications of humanity's offer. The suggestion that his enemies had been restraining themselves during a conflict that had already cost his fleet nearly 30% of its strength was beyond disturbing. "Continue the advance," he ordered, but his voice lacked the conviction that had carried him through 4 decades of successful campaigns. Because for the first time in his life, Admiral Thokras was beginning to understand that some wars couldn't be won through superior force. And the humans were about to demonstrate exactly what that meant. Emperor Vashtal stood in the ruins of what had once been the most secure command center in the galaxy, watching his empire die in real time through displays that showed nothing but failure and retreat. The crystalline walls of his throne room bore scorch marks from weapons that shouldn't exist, and half of his military command structure had been vaporized when human operatives had somehow materialized inside the Imperial Palace itself. The speed of his empire's collapse was beyond anything that military theorists had ever considered possible. In less than 4 months, 8 centuries of conquest had been reduced to scattered refugee fleets and desperate evacuation operations. Worlds that had been under Nigma rule since before humans had learned to work metal were now declaring independence and forming mutual defense pacts with Earth. "Status report," he demanded from the few advisors who remained at their posts. Admiral Thokras, his once pristine uniform scorched and his exoskeleton cracked from his fleet's final desperate engagement with human forces, delivered an assessment that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "Your Majesty, we have lost contact with 73% of our territory. The remaining fleet strength consists of 47 ships in various states of combat effectiveness. Human forces are conducting simultaneous operations in every sector of what used to be our empire." "How is that possible?" "Intelligence indicated that human military strength was minimal." "Sir, our intelligence was deliberately manipulated. The humans have been feeding us false information for decades while positioning assets throughout our territory. When they activated their hidden capabilities, they revealed a military infrastructure that rivals our own at its peak." The Emperor's forearms trembled with rage that had nowhere to direct itself. "Are you telling me that we have been defeated by an enemy that doesn't exist?" "No, Your Majesty. We have been defeated by an enemy that we convinced ourselves didn't exist." The distinction was crucial and devastating. The Nigma Empire hadn't been conquered by a superior military force, they had been systematically dismantled by opponents who understood their weaknesses better than they understood themselves. Humanity had studied 8 centuries of Nigma tactics, identified every pattern and assumption that guided their strategic thinking, and then exploited those patterns with surgical precision. "What are our options?" Thokras studied displays that showed the remnants of the once mighty Imperial fleet scattered across a handful of systems, each group too small to mount effective resistance and too large to hide from human hunter-killer squadrons. "Surrender, evacuation, or extinction, sir." The words hit the Emperor like physical blows. In the entire history of the Nigma Empire, surrender had never been considered a viable option. Their culture, their entire sense of identity, was built on the principle that superior force always prevailed. To acknowledge defeat was to admit that everything they believed about themselves was wrong. "The humans will not accept surrender from us." "Sir, they have made no demands for unconditional surrender. Their terms remain consistent: complete withdrawal from claimed territories, recognition of human sovereignty, and war crimes trials for those responsible for civilian casualties." War crimes trials. The Emperor's voice carried bitter amusement. "They want to judge us by their moral standards. Sir, they want to establish precedents that will prevent this kind of conflict in the future." Before the Emperor could respond, his communications array activated without authorization. The main display showed Admiral Stone, but she wasn't broadcasting from a ship's bridge. She was standing in what appeared to be the Nigma Capitol building, her image transmitted from inside the most secure facility in the Empire. "Emperor Vashtal, I am Admiral Victoria Stone of the United Earth Defense Force. I am currently located in your war room, approximately 40 meters beneath your current position." The Emperor felt something that he had never experienced in his life: helplessness. If humans could penetrate his palace at will, then nowhere in his empire was safe from their reach.